His book is called It's Me, Edward Wayne Edwards, the serial killer you never heard of. John is a 53-year-old retired police detective from Great Falls, Montana. His career in law enforcement began in 1979. He retired in 2005 as a sergeant of detective working cold cases. He has worked on FBI serial killer task force, catching the ritualistic child cannibal killer Nathan Bar Jonah. I came across that, and hopefully we talk to John about a few of these people. His cases have been featured on America's Most Wanted, Dateline NBC, and he helped produce a series known as Most Evil on True TV. He wrote his book, put it all together. You can check out his website, which has a ton of information. His website is www.coldcasedcameron.com. That's Cameron. So going from ufology to serial killers, very interesting. Well, any further delay, let's get John on the phone. John, if I dump you here, just call right back. We're having a very touchy phone board here tonight. Good evening. Welcome to K-Talk AM 630 and the Fringe Radio Show.
Thanks for having me on, Pat.
John, we got you. My switchboard worked good. How are you? You having a good holiday weekend so far?
I am. I play in a band, so last night I played all night in a band, and then tonight I'm talking with you, so it's been a good weekend.
Well, there you go. I'm a musician myself, and so is Bill, who was just on a little bit before us, so been a long time for me. Haven't performed live anywhere, but I sure love it. I have a passion for music.
Yeah, so do I.
So how did you, I gave a little bit of your bio. I found your website absolutely amazing. How did you get into law enforcement? How did maybe give our listeners a little bit of a backstory how you got into all this, and let's talk about some of these people. Edward Wayne Edwards. I've never heard of this guy before, but there's so many of them out there.
Yeah, I had never heard of Edward Wayne Edwards either until 2010. But to give you a little story about how I ended up getting to know him. I was born in Minnesota, and at the age of 18, I decided to be a police officer, so I went to the Minnesota Police Academy in Alexandria, graduated, and then moved to Montana in 1981 and got hired with the Great Falls Police Department and worked 24 years with them and retired as a sergeant of detectives and specialized in cold case murders. And Great Falls was kind of a hideout for serial killers because it's so close to Canada in the middle of nowhere that they tended to like to come here and hide. So it was a great place to be a cop. I got a lot of experience. And after I retired, I went to work in Deer Lodge Prison in 2008 for the parole board here in Montana. And it was in that position, in Deer Lodge Prison, working for the parole board in 2010, that I got introduced to a guy named Edward Wayne Edwards, who at the age of 77 in 2010 just got caught for his first 5 murders that he confessed to. And 4 of them were couples parked in their cars on lovers' lanes. And the other one was a kidnapping, insurance fraud, and beheading of a 22-year-old man. And he made $250,000 on that case. So a memo went out asking other agencies if they'd ever heard of Edward Wayne Edwards and if they could place him in their towns at all, because he was a serial killer that never got caught. I ended up being able to place him in Great Falls in 1956 when we had a double Lover's Lane murder, and that began the unraveling of what this man did. He got away with murder from the age of 11 till the age of 77 when he finally got caught.
What was if I could ask you, John, what put him? Obviously, when he went to prison, he had all these ghosts in the closet, if you will. What did he get caught for that put him in prison?
Well, at the age of 76 in 2009, a Wisconsin TV station ran a special on a cold case, and it was a double murder of a couple parked in their car.
Okay.
And his daughter, Edward Wayne Edwards' daughter, who was 41 years old in 2009, called the police and said she recalled her father taking her to a scene of a murder like that, and they lived in the town that it happened in. And that began the unraveling of him. They went and got his DNA, it matched, and he got arrested for his first murder in 2009, and it was a double murder of a couple that was tortured, tied up, stabbed, kidnapped. I mean, it was just a horrible murder. And then he confessed to 3 more murders after that to try to be executed. His goal, once caught, was to be executed.
Wow. And I'm looking on your website, on your first page. It's got a picture of him. Just looks like a normal family guy.
Yeah, if you go to my website, your listeners, you could just read the homepage and you'll get an idea of what this man did. That really was his ruse. He was a married man of 43 years to the same wife. He had 5 children, 11 grandchildren, and the ruse was to basically use them as cover while he traveled and killed. And he had 2 previous wives, 1956 here in Great Falls, Montana, and 1960 in Portland, Oregon. And he did the same with them and killed repeatedly, using them as a ruse to gain access to his victims.
Now, looking at your, he's got his bio on here. I see that he was on Channel 2 in Chicago and WOR Radio in New York. It says he was an author, lecturer, consultant, and authority on crime. Was he an investigator, or obviously he was an authority on crime because he was doing crime, but he obviously was getting public notoriety for, was it, dissecting cases?
Well, yeah, here's what's really crazy about this guy is once he was caught at the age of 77 and starts confessing to murders, we find out that he actually wrote his autobiography when he was 35, and the whole thing is about how he's a reformed criminal, that he used to be a bad guy, that he used to be a bank robber, a kidnapper, and all of this stuff, but now he's a married family man, and he's running around the country while he's on federal parole from 1967 to 1977. He's on federal parole for bank robbery, and he's allowed to travel the country and preach that he's a reformed criminal and that he's authority on crime. And he does it everywhere, and he's killing people the entire time he's doing it. And then he finally gets identified when he's 77.
Wow. So when he was given all these lectures and what have you, as far as him killing people never really came up, just as, hey, I was a bad guy, robbed some banks or did some things, but nothing horrendous. Do you think that was giving him a lot of working with maybe with law enforcement and stuff, John? Was it giving him a little bit of an edge to hone his killing skills a little bit more?
Yeah, that's really all he did is used everybody, not only his family but the entire criminal justice system. He had conned his parole officer that entire 10 years he's on parole, claiming he was reformed when he was in fact killing everywhere. And if you go on my timeline on the website, you'll see how many people he killed while he was on parole, and it's just sickening. He was very smooth, very sharp, very bright, and he always had been. And he was always able to inform on his own murders and then get released on crimes once he was caught. Like he'd be caught for burglary or robbery or something like that, and he'd immediately inform on a murder that he committed but had directed the evidence towards an innocent person. And so the cops would give him a break, he'd be released, and the innocent person would get arrested for his murder, and that would be his MO his whole life, is to commit a murder, make sure that the evidence points towards somebody he just decides that he wants it to, and then provide the information through false identities to the police and the press, and steer the evidence to the innocent.
Now, going through some of the information on the website, this is just, like I say, it's baffling. Did he claim to be the Zodiac Killer at one time, or trying to give, what was his tie with the Zodiac Killer?
Well, the Zodiac Killer, who killed from 68 to 70 in San Francisco, killed couples on lovers' lanes. And that's exactly what Edwards confessed to in 2010, and that's exactly what happened here in Great Falls in 1956 with our murder. And so once I was able to put him in Great Falls in 56, killing a couple on a lover's lane and killing couples in 1980 and 1977 in Ohio and Wisconsin, It was clear that he liked to kill couples on lovers' lanes. So I confronted him about being the Zodiac Killer and eventually got confessions out of him. But he had gone to the press right after the Zodiac killings in 1971 and tried to steer the evidence towards a man that he had been in Deer Lodge prison with here in 1956 named Frank Dryman. And that article you can see on my website, March of 1971, if you just go to the timeline.
Right.
And it clearly shows that he's trying to set up another man for being the Zodiac Killer when, in fact, it was him all along.
So do you believe he's the Zodiac Killer?
Yeah, there is no doubt that he is the Zodiac Killer. We did confront him in 2010 after we solved the Zodiac cryptograms that the Zodiac had sent to the press. And that really started this whole unraveling of who he was. I mean, he had killed a couple in my hometown in '56, didn't get caught till 2010, really, and then gets identified as killing other couples on lovers' lanes. And so the Zodiac case fell into it right away. But the Zodiac case was really just a small portion of what this man did. The Zodiac killer, Ed Edwards, killed from age 11 until age 77, and he never got caught.
Wow.
And it was just the Zodiac case was just a 2-year period of a crime he did in San Francisco as revenge for the wrongful execution of a man there in 1956.
Interesting. Now now going through going through again on the first page, what is his tie to John Benet Ramsey?
Well, actually, that came into the case after he was identified through the investigation as being the Zodiac Killer,
okay.
And that he had been killing for that many years. I decided to investigate his life, and so I befriended Edwards and confronted him about many of these murders. But it turns out that in 1946, Edwards had killed a little 6-year-old girl in Chicago, and he had lured her out of the house at night while her parents slept, left a ransom note, took her to a basement, strangled her, beheaded her, and then taunted the police with false letters. And 50 years later, he did the exact same thing to Joan Benet Ramsey, and that's how that all came into it. Once I was able to tie Edwards to being the Zodiac Killer, to being killing since he was age 11, and staging ritualistic murders. And what I mean by that, he would kill on Christmas, Easter, New Year's, Cinco de Mayo, 4th of July, All Saints Day, Halloween, anything that tied to Christianity, kind of, because he was completely destroyed in a Catholic orphanage when he was little, so he took everything against the Christians. And Joan Benet was killed on Christmas and laid out ritualistically in the basement, exactly like his first victim in 1946 was killed. And it really did unravel the worst serial killer there's ever been, and he was just able to con everybody for that many years and get away with it, all the while standing in front of everybody on TV, on movies, on radio stations, in editors' offices of newspapers, bragging that he's reformed, when in fact he wasn't reformed at all.
Wow. John, now you're saying that you feel he's killed over 500 people?
Yeah, when I finished the book in December of last year, I had him tied to 121 murders. I went through the book just recently and added them up.
Okay.
There were so many murders coming into the case that I had to stop it at some point and write the book and get it out in the public so that the public would know, because this man was never investigated by the FBI or law enforcement because he was an informant for them his whole life. So when he got identified in 2010, they never looked at him. They hoped he died, and eventually he did die. So I investigated him. But he just was able to get inside of all of the investigations that he committed, all the murders he committed. He was always able to get inside the police, inside the prosecutors, inside the press, and steer the evidence towards innocent people. And with Joan Benet Ramsey, he steered it towards the parents. He wanted it to look like it was an inside job, and it did. And that's the way he did it all his life.
So with John Benet, was he brought on as a consultant in this case? Or was
No. He groomed his way into Patsy Ramsey, who was living in Atlanta back in the 90s.
Okay.
Before they moved to Boulder, Colorado. And she was a beauty queen, and he had killed beauty queens his whole life, and he targeted that family long before Joan Benet was killed for destruction. He targeted to kill their firstborn child. That's kind of the way he was. He would target people and completely plan the murders meticulously to steer the evidence to the innocent, and then steer the press to the innocent, and then just stand back and watch in front of everybody under assumed identity all the time. And it was the signature on the Joan Benet Ramsey note that tied him to the whole thing at the very beginning, and that signature was Victory SBTC. And nobody could understand what the heck did that mean. Well, it meant victory, the Christian phrase, and SBTC, signed by the cross, the Zodiac cross. That's the way the Zodiac signed all of his letters, was with the Zodiac, signed by the cross, and Edwards was the Zodiac killer, and that's why he signed it, SBTC.
Wow, this is a bad dude.
It's the worst one. There's never been one like him. He killed not only everywhere in the United States, but Canada, Mexico, and he flew around the world. He was completely funded through murder, through life insurance fraud and other types of fraud of planting the body and collecting rewards. And you had asked me earlier about the 500 people he killed, and that all actually came up. The number of people he killed came up after I did a radio show last month on Coast to Coast Radio. I got a phone call and emails from people regarding some murders in Pennsylvania and Florida that they felt he might have done. And it was those phone calls and the information they provided that opened up a period of time that Edwards killed and then blogged on the Internet. And that period of time was 1996, right after JonBenet Ramsey, in 1999. And those 3 years, I really had very little information on my timeline as to what he was doing. But the radio program last month opened up what he was doing.
Right.
And he actually posted his confession. If you go on my website on the timeline to January 8th, 1997, that's 13 days after JonBenet was killed, you'll read his confession to the 50 years of murder and 500 people.
Did anybody sit? Now, obviously, did you have the opportunity to sit down with him and talk to him about a lot of these things? I mean, did he confess up a lot of things?
No, here's how this all came down, is in June of 2010, while I was working for the parole board, and I got the memo that he was possibly a suspect in a double murder in Montana. Well, I was able to tie him to a double murder I had as a police officer that I had worked on with our sheriff's office in the past.
Okay.
And so once I tied him to that, I decided to confront him with a letter. Just, please confess to this murder. We can tell the family you did it. You've already pled to 5 others, and you're going to be put to death. And it ended up being a game of letter writing and phone calls between him for a year. He was the Zodiac killer who was also a letter writer and a game player. And the only way he was going to give it up was if somebody challenged him. And so once I wrote that first letter, and then shortly after that, my friend, who was highly intelligent and had studied Aleister Crowley and satanic history, confronted Edwards with his cryptograms he had written in the Zodiac case that we solved, and they named Edward Edwards. And it was after that that we actually became friends with this guy for a year. Letter writing, phone calls. We never got to meet him face to face because he died April of 2011, just before our interview. But we have dozens of letters from him, and every letter was like a game of, we might have caught the Zodiac, but we didn't know the whole story, is what he kept telling us. And he was right.
Yeah, I'm just for our listeners on your web, for those that are not on the internet, I looked through the letters, and he's in one of the, I think it's page 6 here, it says, if you write about me, make sure you say nice things about me. I'm really a nice guy, but then he's got the little frowny face. I'm a little bit like you, just a big kid at heart.
Yeah, kind of sick. Actually, those little frowny faces and smiley faces actually opened up a set of murders that he did in Minnesota and Iowa, the smiley face murders. And that all came about from releasing the book and the letters, and people reading my letters that I got from him and seeing the connections to other murders in those letters.
Wow.
They were always a puzzle.
Yeah, here he's asking you for a little bit of money so he can buy some Christmas candy for himself. Then the smiley face, or the frowny face with the exclamation point.
Well, that right there was a very important clue, actually. That he kidnapped a gal named Helen Brock in 1976, I believe it was the year. She was the heiress to the Brock Candy Company, multi-million-dollar gal that disappeared in the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and never seen again. And that really was a clue to be followed when he kept telling me about he wanted candy, 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 and I just couldn't quite understand what he was trying to tell me. But he kept telling me, you also don't know the whole story. And that little candy quote was relating to Helen Brock.
Interesting, very interesting. One of our listeners writes, and let me just throw this out there for you. It says, John, was this gentleman ever in South Florida in 1971? He says, me and a friend hitchhiked to Fort Lauderdale Beach one night and was picked up by three people who had California plates, and the guy had a gun, and he was wearing sunglasses at night. His friend said he was the Zodiac Killer, and me and my friend jumped out of the moving vehicle and ran.
Well, in 1971, he was out, and yes, he did spend a lot of time in Florida because he had an ex-wife who lived there, Marlene Harmon, and still does, Daytona Beach area. And he'd also spent his whole life killing there. He was arrested there in 1951 after he went AWOL from the Marines. He started informing on his own murders. He got out, but he killed in Florida all the way up until 2008. His last one in Florida that I found was in 2008. But yeah, he terrorized Florida, Texas, Pennsylvania, Ohio, California. Those were some of the big states that he killed dozens and dozens of people in.
Interesting. Very interesting. Did he, I guess I asked you this question before. I know we kind of went a little different direction, but were the authorities ever able to sit down with him before he died and present a lot of these cases and say, was it you or somebody else, or did that never really happen?
Well, that happened between his capture in July of 2009.
Okay.
And up until his contact with the press in June of 2010. He actually went to the press in June of 2010 and demanded to talk to them on camera and confessors. He had been writing letters to police officers all over the nation trying to fish for his execution, saying there were other murders and trying to get somebody to investigate him. And many of those letters can be found on my website in the year 2010 on the timeline. But yeah, lots of policemen spoke to him, but he was a game player. He was never going to confess to anybody straight out unless they were going to challenge him with who he really was.
Wow, unbelievable. So basically, again, with all these deaths, it's just sitting down and kind of. He obviously left a lot of little clues laying around, and through those clues and being in different places, you were able to kind of pull things together and kind of pin him to a lot of these different murders.
Well, yeah, the important thing about knowing about Mr. Edwards and the fact that he wrote his autobiography when he was 35 years old, claiming to be reformed, the autobiography wasn't really an autobiography at all. It was really a puzzle of murder. It was the first 22 years of his killings. And on the front it says, now he is a writer, a respected citizen, and the head of a family of 5. He would always write things to the police, the press, the public, when he killed somebody. They were anonymous. Many were signed by the Zodiac. Some were signed by the Ghost Killer. Others signed by Scorpion. He went by many, many different names, but they always tied to ancient Egyptian history, satanic type of stuff. So his murders not only always had letters, anonymous phone calls, but the murders themselves were satanic in nature. And by satanic, I don't mean we're talking about the long black hair and black fingernail teenagers. We're talking about a guy who completely believes that he is an ancient Egyptian god like Osiris, Re, all of these ancient Satans that were horrible people. That's what he wanted to be, and that's what he wanted to go down in history as. So he always left the written evidence to be found. And as I went through the book and I found the Great Falls Murder written in the book, the 1956 murder, that really showed what the book was, and that is a puzzle of murder. And he was always puzzle playing in his letters to the police. So in all of the letters that you read on my timeline to the other police officers, you'll see clues to be followed also. You just had to know who he was.
Man, what do you think, John? I mean, was he in and out of foster care, or was he abused as a child? Did any clue to what kind of or insight to what started this?
Yeah, he had a horrible upbringing. He was born in 1933. That's the height of the Great Depression in Cleveland, Ohio. And during the first 5 years that he is raised, he's raised by an aunt and uncle, and he thinks they're his mother and father. But at age 5, his mother is released from prison. His aunt and uncle throw him to his mother. He doesn't know who his father is. And within the first year of living with his real mother, she gets shot and dies. And they change his name, and they stick him in a Catholic orphanage. He has no idea who he is. He gets raped, beaten by the nuns, raped by the priests and the older boys, and by age 11 decides that he is going to come out, and he is going to be Satan, and he's going to show them how he could get even, and that would be by killing people and setting people up. And that first little girl he killed in 1946, the little 6-year-old, which was the first Jo Monet Ramsey, her father was actually in charge of the funding for the orphanage that he had been staying at, and he targeted them just because of that. And so that's why he killed their daughter. And 50 years later, he targeted John Ramsey, who was actually working in computers with the Defense Department. And he targeted them because of that, and because Patsy was a beauty queen, and killed their daughter 50 years later. That's the way he was. He was a ritualistic killer, and his murders all have this ritualistic side to them. And my book details the nature of the ritualistic stuff I'm talking about.
Wow. Do you think that with your book, John, and all the information that's pulled together, I mean, the details of a lot more crimes will be solved? Do you think there's, I mean, like you said, it's a puzzle. Do you think that just as more things are studied and dissected, more will come out and maybe identify some, you say you're talking about 500 people, maybe more of these victims will be tied to him?
Yeah, that was really the whole purpose of writing the book and getting it out as soon as possible, although it took 4 years to put this together. I knew there would be more found. I just had no idea how many more there would be and how fast it would be coming into me. And it's really a matter of getting it out. There hasn't been any national press on this story at all, other than radio programs are doing it, but no TV is. But once the information is out there, I get emails every day on other murders that other people have found just by reading my book, going to the website, looking at where he was, and they're finding the murders. And so I found 121, but there were 500 up until 96. But you also have to understand that he had 13 more years from 96 to 2009 to kill, and he did. And he wanted to become the best killer ever. That really was his goal in life. And Timothy McVeigh was the best killer ever in 2001 with 168. And Edwards was way beyond that in 2001 and bragged about that a lot online. He always taunted people to try to catch him. He was the smartest guy. He was America's most wanted.
Yeah, like I said, it's interesting. This is somebody that you've never, never heard of. I mean, of course, there's the John Wayne Gacy's and the Jeffrey Dahmers, and there's some other, obviously there's other ones out there, but this one is intriguing. I mean, it's amazing that with all the work and time you've put into this, what you've come up with. And again, there's so many unknown people out there. I find it interesting that doing more delving into it could point to this individual.
Yeah, there'll be many more, and I'm sure there's other investigations going on that I don't even know about. But he planted DNA at many of his murders so that it would really never lead back to him or anybody close to him. And he really thrived off that, and that helped him succeed, because no matter when he was questioned, if somebody did suspect him of a murder, the DNA or the hair or the blood or the fiber would never match. So he could always say, well, check the DNA, and it would never match, and that leaves an investigator frustrated. But he actually transferred, You'd kill somebody over here and take a piece of their body and plant it over here.
Right.
Planting hair, blood, saliva, semen, anything just so it would confuse police. He loved to taunt the police.
A question that somebody emailed in, or that just sent in, said, how much of the time do you think he maybe wanted to get caught? Do you think he was looking to get caught, John?
Yeah, from the very first killing, the little 6-year-old girl in Chicago in 1946, he wrote on the pole, "Please stop me, I can't control myself." And that clearly, he was only 13 years old when he did that, and he had already been diagnosed a sadomasochist at that age. I do have his psych records. And he wanted to be stopped, but he also wanted to be challenged, and he wanted somebody to beat him at his game, because he was called stupid throughout his whole formative years, and it turns out he was a genius with a really high IQ. I mean, anybody that can publish their own autobiography and appear in movies and albums and everything he's done obviously has a high IQ, but he was extremely brilliant and destroyed very young, and he was only going to be caught if somebody actually caught him in the act, and he never got caught in the act. He was so smooth.
Interesting. Was there any law enforcement throughout the years through doing your research? Was there anybody, John, that was onto this guy at all, or was maybe keeping tabs on him? I mean, was there anybody that, or was he just that good that he could stay a couple steps ahead of anybody, or was there anybody kind of pursuing him down but could never connect the pieces?
I'm sure there were many police officers that investigated him, and it would have been a horrible thing to investigate this man when he was free, because he would make your life terrible. He had a way of always grooming himself into the police departments where he lived. His wife told me that, when they moved, the first thing he would do is go introduce himself to the police. And that way he would make friends with them. And then he'd invite them over for poker, and he'd play and drink with them. And he'd get inside information. So no matter what, if somebody suspected him of murder, it would never lead to him. The evidence would never lead there, so it left them frustrated. And he was always right in front of them as their buddy. And so it was very difficult to investigate a man like Ed Edwards. He was a paid informant for the FBI since '51.
Oh, wow.
And he informed every decade up until his capture, and received favoritism throughout every decade because of his informing. And so once he was identified as a serial killer at 77, I'm sure there were police officers all over the place that went, "Oh my God, it's him." And the man never got investigated. I never understood why in 2010 the FBI didn't open up a case on him, but now I understand why.
Carl writes in, he's from Salt Lake City. Carl writes in and says, John, did Edward ever help police solve crimes that weren't his? Meaning that he was working with law enforcement. Did he help did he help solve crimes that he didn't commit? Or could they have been him all along?
Well, he helped them solve many murders that he committed, and by solving them, they ended up arresting an innocent person.
Right.
I found 24. But as for him informing on a murder or somebody he might know that committed murder, I never found anything like that. I did find evidence that he killed people that were kind of seedy and of that character, just as revenge, and got away with it. Yeah.
The people that were put away, innocent people that were put away, are they appealing, or are they trying to get released, or are these people that are long gone?
No, there's still 9 alive that I know of, and that's really, I spent the first 2 years of this investigation beating my head on the wall with prosecutors, police officers on all of these cases that people are sitting in prison on. But once somebody's convicted, the courts have a really special way of treating people once they've been convicted, and that's horrible, actually. They have no rights. They're all convicted. They're sitting there behind walls. They have no support. The police don't want to open up their own investigation on their own murder. If they got the wrong guy, they don't want to even bring it up. So, no, there's still 9 people sitting in prison right now, and they're all listed on my website that are innocent. Clearly innocent, set up by this man. and another 15 of them died.
Wow.
One just died in prison 2 years ago, and he spent 66 years in prison on the murder that Edwards did.
Do you think
Claiming he was innocent the whole time.
Do you
William
think those 9 may have a chance at a retrial?
Well, I think there's a couple that I've really had some good cooperation from the defense on. One in Florida named Stobart Holt, who was set up for the killing of Robert Wiles in 2008 down in Lakeland, Florida. That one I could see getting out, and I hope so. There was a man named Father Gerald Robinson who got convicted in Toledo, Ohio in 2006 for crucifying a nun on Easter Saturday in a church, and Edwards actually set that man up, and Father Robinson just died this 4th of July in prison. He was innocent. Many of these people I'm talking about are in my book, and you can read about the cases.
Right, right.
But they're horrible. He would target cheating husbands with pregnant wives, knowing that if he killed their wife, that the husband would become the suspect because he was cheating on her. And he would always pick his victims like that. He would try to make sure that they were doing something a little off-kilter, sinning in some way, whether it be sex, drugs, money, whatever it might be. He'd tempt them. And then he'd kill someone close to them and steal the evidence so that he could get a parent or a spouse arrested for the murder of their own wife or child. That really is what he did his whole life. And I guess I bring up the JonBenet Ramsey case over and over again because that is the poster child of how good he was and how we destroyed that family here after she was killed. And that was the intent of it. He loved to create that type of hatred.
How does he, John, how did he target people? I mean, like you mentioned about again, if you could maybe shed a little insight, somebody was cheating on their wife. Would he find these things? I mean, were some of these people that he actually befriended, or kind of would he bring people into his circle and kind of analyze them a little bit? Is that, or was it just random things or word of mouth things, or did he actually kind of build a case for all his victims?
He always built a case for each victim, and it always tied to a previous victim or wrongdoing. And what I mean by that is that if he killed somebody, let's say in Florida, and the police went after an innocent man and convicted him, he'd return to Florida and pick another victim that somehow relates to the previous victim, but not too close that they'll figure it out, and then kill again and kill again. And that he would just repeat that cycle over and over again. And such as with John and Patsy Ramsey, Edward's son worked for Lockheed Martin at the time. So there was a connection already because Lockheed Martin was the parent company of John Ramsey's company. So there was already a connection with Edwards and John Ramsey just through his son working in the same business. And he targeted them for years and planned on killing their child on Christmas when she was 6 in 1996. So it would be 50 years exactly from his first one.
And it's interesting, too, because a lot of these, obviously, with all this work that you've done and with all this information, there's still a lot of these cases that they never officially came, they're still in the unsolved category, aren't they?
Yeah, there's a lot of wasted resources going on right now regarding his murders because they were always designed to go after somebody, and they constantly do. There's murders that he committed back in the 60s that even today there'll be articles in the newspapers about people accusing innocent people of the murder, and they're innocent. But that's kind of how they were designed.
Yeah, it's just and like you said, with people in prison, and I'm sure in a lot of these cases there's just not the manpower to. Obviously, if the victim is well, they're a victim, they're gone, they're no longer living. If enough resources have been wasted, not wasted, but spent on these cases, obviously a lot of this stuff just gets shuffled under the rug.
Well, just to give you an idea, this case alone took 3 years to investigate, and I've been on investigations of homicides that have taken 2 to 3 years. But this one, I've never been involved in anything so intense as this because this man killed for so many years that all you had to do is follow the evidence. But the evidence just never stops coming. because he did kill 500 people for that 50-year period, and we've only found 121. So there's, some more easily out there, and they'll keep coming because he had always put it out there for anybody to do. Anybody can do this. He was a genius on the computer and put up websites regarding his murders that were always clues to who the real killer was. And it was intense, but it was the best thing we ever did here in Great Falls, some friends of mine, and we're glad we did it.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, there's to help solve these things. Couple questions that were sent in for you, John. Let me go ahead and get them to you here that were emailed in. Why do you think people? And maybe we could talk a little about this, but why do you think people become serial killers? Do you think it's they're born? They're just born that way? Do you think that obviously, like with this gentleman, something happens at a very early age to trigger things? You've got the John Wayne Gacy's and the Jeffrey Dahmers. Do you think obviously this guy started at a very young age? Do you think some of them snap? What's your thoughts on this?
Well, with all of the killers that I've investigated, some of them being pretty seriously disturbed, such as Nathan Barjona, killed a little 10-year-old boy here in Great Falls and cannibalized him. Every one of them had some type of a head injury or abuse at a very young age, prior to 7, 8 years old. Smacked in the head by a parent or abused by a relative or some horrible event in their life. And that seems to be the stressor. It's just not being brought up in a loving environment. That really is it. And I'm not saying that anybody who has somebody in prison who's killed somebody wasn't a loving parent. Serial killers just are different, and many of them, the ones I've dealt with, have come from horrible family upbringing, smacked in the head a lot, abused, yelled at, called stupid. That seems to be the main starting point, but that doesn't mean that happens to everybody at that age. They're going to become a serial killer. But the ones that I've dealt with, such as Nathan Barjona, Ed Edwards, they were all completely abused when they were prior to 10 years old.
How many did Nathan? How many did he just kill? How many people did he kill? Was it just one, or did he kill several?
Well, we charged him with killing one here in Great Falls, and then we ended up convicting him on molesting 3 others and sent him to prison for life on that, and never did get a conviction on the killing here. He had kidnapped 5 other little boys back in Massachusetts back in the 70s, tried to kill some of them, and ended up in a Massachusetts prison for 20 years, and then got shipped to Montana in the 90s, and that's when he ended up here and kidnapped a little 10-year-old boy and lived out his fantasy of wanting to cannibalize a little 10-year-old boy, and he did and got away with it. He's dead. He died in prison 2011, but he also got sent to prison for life for molesting 3 little boys here in Great Falls.
Yeah, especially with one thing I'm finding interesting. Again, I think serial killers. I think it's kind of it's a fascinating subject. I don't mean it's a good subject by any means, or do I promote it by any means? But it is fascinating. It fascinates us that individuals can be this way. And doing a little of my own, and I'm no researcher, but just researching different people for guests on the shows and looking into books and different things. It's kind of like child molesters. It seems like it always stems back to an occurrence. Something pretty horrific happens at a very young age.
Yeah, with Edwards, it was not only having his life pulled out from under him once his mother was shot in the stomach and died in front of him, and then his name has changed, and then he's stuck into a Catholic orphanage, and he's abused by priests, nuns, and the children, the older boys there. And so he took his killing all against Christianity because of that.
Right. Where can our listeners get your book, John?
It's on Amazon, but you can also go on my website, coldcasecameron.com, and if you buy it there, I'll sign it and mail it to you right away. It's selling pretty good. I just haven't had a lot of national media on this story, but it really does need to come out because there's a lot of people. There's going to be a lot more innocent people in prison also.
Right.
That are going to be identified in the future.
Well, and again, as one of our listeners stated, wanting to know about Florida, can people contact you if they have some information? Are you willing to take an email from people that maybe sounds a little interesting? I mean, do you keep a record of that when people approach you on somebody that might have been this guy?
Yes, actually, my phone number, my email, everything's on my website, and you can contact me right through there. And I try to answer every one of them. Yeah, that's all I've been doing since I've released the book is actually investigating more murder. And it's led to having to do another book just to put out what he really did. I mean, even when I thought I finished the book and I thought I was done, I'm not even close to being done.
You just scratched the surface with this one. Would you like to? We've got an NBC News break coming on. Would you like to talk a little bit more on the other side, or do you have to take off?
No, I'm still good if you're still good.
I am. Yeah, we got more questions sent in, and again, like I said, it's not a nice subject, but it is somewhat fascinating, and people need to hear about it. Our guest tonight is John Cameron. You need to check out his book. You can find his website. Get up to my notes here, called coldcasecameron.com. Go check out the website. Very informative. His book is called It's Me, Edward Wayne Edwards, the serial killer you never heard of. I never heard of this gentleman before. Well, this individual, I should say, before. And I'm going to have to sit down and take a look at the book and dig into more details. But the website is definitely intriguing.